So I'm delighted to welcome you to the 4th annual Summer Salon sponsored by the School of Jewish Nonprofit Management with the JCPSC, the Jewish Communal Professionals of Southern California. Each year, at the end of our summer session, as part of our curriculum in educating the next generation of Jewish professional leaders, we invite a senior professional to serve as the Rabbi Louis Bernstein Scholar in Residence. This year we were fortunate to have Dr. John Russ-Gay with us to share his insights from 35 years of service to the Jewish community. He led a seminar today which continues tomorrow, and in addition to tonight's salon, will be the culmination speaker tomorrow afternoon, 5 o'clock at the school for anybody who would like to join us. I've known John for literally 40 years, since 1971, when the New York Chavurah, of which John was one of the founders, came up to spend the Shabbat with the Boston Chavurah, of which I was one of the founders. It was an interesting interaction. Since then, we've taught together, we've studied together, we shared life's moments together, and we have been colleagues in Jewish communal life. John has had a remarkable career that has touched so many important arenas of Jewish life. He was the executive director and director of education at SAJ, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which was the kind of the flagship of the Reconstructionist movement. He served as educational director of the 92nd Street Y, vice chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and for the past 18 years he's been at the UJ Federation of New York, the last 11 as president and CEO. As I told my students this morning, John is arguably the leading Jewish professional in the field today. So I'm delighted that you're joining us. We'll talk about that. I've known Jay Sanderson for a shorter time, but we've been fellow toilers in the same field of Jewish culture. I believe the first time we met was in the late 80s at a General Assembly when I, as the Associate Director of the National Foundation for Jewish Culture, was moderating a panel on Jewish culture and Jewish continuity. Jay raised some probing and provocative questions about the Jewish community's involvement, or more properly, uninvolvement, in the then nascent arena of cable television and the opportunities that it provided for narrowcasting. As the executive director of JTN, Jewish Television Network, Jay went on to one achievement after another, dragging the Jewish community kicking and screaming into the media age. He developed award-winning children's programming, produced the remarkable PBS series, The Jewish Americans, and was the first to stream high holiday services over the internet, expanding our understanding of Jewish community. He joined the LA Federation as president and CEO almost 2 years ago and has already led a major reimagining and restructuring of the Federation's role in addressing the needs of the LA Jewish community. So I'm delighted to have these two friends and colleagues with us this evening, the professional leaders of the two largest federations in North America, to discuss the role of the professional in today's federation. So, let's start. It always occurred to me that the position of CEO, president, head of the federation was one of the most difficult jobs that I could imagine. Long hours, variety of issues. You're up from early morning meetings to who knows when. Always the pressure of funding. Everything needs more money than we can possibly provide. Why do you guys do it?
Well, first of all, thank you for that generous introduction, and I'm going to get to the question, but it's great to be here. I'm seeing a lot of friends and colleagues. Some I go back all the way to Camp Ramah, which changed my life. about 45 years ago, or maybe 50 years ago. I'm with one of the deans of the field here, Jerry Bubis, who ennobles us. He remains our teacher, and so many others, professors and others. So I'm delighted to be here and great to be in Los Angeles. Why do we do this? Well, I was going to joke and say neurosis has no limits, but you know, I often say, and they pay me for this. I mean, I consider this work privilege. To have the opportunity to be involved in responding to enormous job loss in the Jewish community and create responses as we did. I won't go through the details, but in New York we created a bold, powerful response to enormous job loss in the Jewish community 2 years ago. To be involved now in completing the rescue of the Felis Mara from Ethiopia. Last week, as some of you know, I was in Moscow and St. Petersburg. To be involved in making certain that every kid who reaches out can go to a Jewish summer camp in the former Soviet Union 20 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. We've got the renewal of Jewish life coming. The kids who want to go to Jewish summer camp, I mean, I went to these Jewish summer camps last week. They are as inspiring as Ramah was for me, changed my life. To have this opportunity to work in these vineyards at this extraordinary moment for change. So, you know, there are people that say, I can't believe it, how do you do this job? And I always say, it's harder for you in your head, my job, than it is for me to do it. And I urge students, as I did today earlier, to find professional water where you can swim easily. You know, my sister, who I'm very close with, I love, is a therapist. For me to sit in a room for 10 hours a day to hear people talk about their mothers and fathers would be a bullet in the head. For me to have the opportunity to be involved in the work I just said, or as I understand fundraising, which is actually not about fundraising, but actually providing people the opportunity to do mitzvot and to try to evoke in people a sense of gratitude. We are the most privileged human beings that have ever roamed the planet, certainly the most privileged Jews. For me to have the opportunity to sit with people and talk about the fact that in Los Angeles and in New York, there is another New York, there is a second New York of people living in a totally other space. There are opportunities for Jewish renewal and inspiration. What an opportunity to be in these positions. So for me, your question, I understand it. And maybe that's the same way, but for me, this is water where I swim professionally, and I still bounce up in the morning. And the problem is that the opportunity to both engage people in this work and respond boldly to the challenges we face and the opportunities are extraordinary.
Jay?
I think you just experienced the hardest part of my job, which is to follow my brilliant, thoughtful friend, John Resquet. So, look, I'm one of these people who never expected to be in this job. I've known both these gentlemen for a long time. Never did I expect to be in this job. And I agree with John. I don't see this as a difficult job. I see this every day as an opportunity. I look around this room with some of the incredibly talented professionals I have the honor to work with every day and some of the most incredible lay people, and I feel like I am the luckiest man in the world. The only thing I would add to what John said is I didn't have the experience that John had to this point. I look at my job as what will the Jewish community look like next for the next generation, and I feel like we have the responsibility and the honor to create a community for the next generation that is as rich as the communities that we all grew up in. So to me, it's every day is a privilege and an honor, and you know, whether the hours, I have more energy at the end of the day and in the morning. My staff knows I email at all hours because this job is invigorating, it's inspirational, it's extraordinary.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the job and the Federation right now. The Federation, as I don't have to tell you, is going through significant changes. It's been going through changes for the past 15 years, 20 years or so. Legacy givers who understand the commitment to community are not as prevalent as they once were. Directed giving, individual projects are more ascendant. This changes the nature of both the board, the lay leadership of the Federation in terms of their responsibility as community stewards, and the role of the professional. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you have, how you see your position vis-a-vis this new paradigm. Jay, let's start with you, because you've talked in several settings about the new professional-lay relationship that you were establishing in LA. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, look, this federation's 100 years old. And it was, when it was created 100 years ago, there were 3 agencies in Los Angeles that didn't want to raise funds anymore. So they wanted to create an umbrella agency to raise funds so they could focus on the work that they wanted to do. And 100 years ago, that was an important initiative and an important goal. Now, in this day and age, this Los Angeles and New York, we have many similarities, but Los Angeles is a dynamic Jewish community. I would argue that this is the greatest Jewish community in North America, Los Angeles, and we can talk about it later. But
It's great that you feel that way.
But I think that the premises that we had in the past are gone. Here's one premise: the Jewish community. I don't think there is a Jewish community in Los Angeles. I think there are hundreds of communities. We also have a large number of Jewish organizations that certainly didn't exist 100 years ago, but they didn't even exist 25 years ago. And so the needs of the community have changed. The dynamics of the concept of community have changed. There are multiple agencies doing work that didn't happen before. So the Federation needs to kind of recalibrate, right? Reposition itself. What are we needed for today? How can we create a sense of community within these communities today? And it's obviously a different mission than it was in the past. I think change, I've said this before, I don't like to use the word change because I think it has a negative connotation to some people. I think transformation is the right word. I think we're at a transformative moment because the needs have changed. And I'll just end by saying, if you look at the needs and the desires of young people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, it's different. Now, John and I, we went to Ramah as kids. I had an Israel experience. I grew up in a religious home. When I see young people today, their Judaism is different than mine. Their connection to community is different. Their needs are different. And so I believe that the Federation needs to look around, talk to the community. At the end of the day, we're in the relationship business and create new relationships. And as a result of that, the business model has to adapt. And we are a business. And when you talk about lay professional relations, I think in this economy, with the challenges that we have, never having enough resources, the relationship between professionals and lay people change because I think the pressure on a professional to do a professional job is different today than it was in the past.
How so?
I think we have to run federations and nonprofit organizations more like businesses. We have to have more accountability. I think the expectations have to be different. I think we have to deal in terms that we never thought about before, measurable outcomes, how you evaluate success. I think our donors want to know when they invest in something that they can see a return on that investment. And that puts pressure on professionals to be a different kind of a steward of the dollars and run a different kind of a business.
John, do you want to comment on that from your perspective?
One of the great difficulties of this job is to follow up Jay. No. I just want to make a comment. I don't tend to surf with this business language. I just think we've seen what business in part has brought us to. And I don't want to go into this, but I think we have to run mission-driven organizations that can respond to the needs of Jewish history. I do not think this is about federations. I think this is about what do the Jewish people require. Toward that end, all change, I no doubt every period of life is characterized by change, but I think we underestimate the extent to which the change that is underway now is dramatic, will be, and in ways none of us can fully understand. All we can is try to maximize the likelihood of a positive Jewish future. Let me spend a minute on this. I believe this is modern Jewish history begins in the Haskalah, French Revolution. I believe we are at the first, this is the moment of the full test of the modernity and living in the open society. Why? Because until the 1960s and 70s, although increasingly we could go to the best universities and go to the best corporations, we were still a kept community. And we set a whole set of institutions which helped us become good Americans. The synagogue, regrettably, many of them were institutions of acculturation and assimilation. Americans, if you want to be a good American, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, we had institutions. It was not about spiritual community. Now, increasingly, everyone, we are all Jews by choice. The question is, can we create community that has sufficient meaning and purpose and provides community? The Jews will choose to be part of us, not because they have to, they don't, not because they have guilt, they have little, but because of the meaning and what it provides. That is an entirely new setting. I was with 18 rabbis last week in Russia, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, wonderful congregational rabbis who talked about the profound challenge to the congregational model. We're talking about open society. People are privatizing all sorts of rite de passage, where the synagogue should or should not have used the bar mitzvah as a lever for membership. That is in a waning period. Hence the role of the professional. There was an overarching paradigm, I would say, from the 1930s to the 1980s. Rescue Jews, deal with Jewish poverty, fight anti-Semitism, build a Jewish state. The Federation became the philanthropic powerhouse it is on the back of Israel at Risk. Israel is challenged in multiple ways. Probably nothing weighs on me as heavy as the multiple challenges that face Israel. But it is not anymore, off the record, fundamentally about our money. All of North American Jewish philanthropy has been recontextualized by the success of the Israeli economy. That doesn't mean what we do in Israel isn't excellent and important. It is. Strengthens the ties. It does. But it's a whole different place than when North American Jewish philanthropy was 30% of the GNP. So when there was an overarching paradigm, the role of the professional in federation was what I would call facilitative leadership. There was a broad consensus, and the question was, how do we maximize that consensus? The role of the professional, I would say, in the federation, I believe, as some of you heard earlier, I believe all professionals and volunteer leaders ultimately are communal educators. And the challenge at the moment is we actually are all together forging a narrative. What does Jewish history require? What does the moment require? And I believe professionals with volunteer leadership need to forge that question, and what can each institution do to respond to that? My own take on that is we're all, now the challenge is, can we create what my language is, inspired community and caring community, and ones which have a take also of collective responsibility? This is huge, against the grain of modern culture. I love that. Okay? I think we stand against the grain of much of modern culture in important ways. We can explore that. This is a different role. The overarching paradigm, it's not fully passed, but it's waning. So therefore, the role of professionals and volunteer leaders are together to forge a question. What does in New York I'll use, how could New York Federation become an important critical resource for the strengthening of Jewish life, and in our view, in New York, in Israel, and Russia, and throughout the world? We believe we ended, as some of you know, I think you may be considering or have done that, we ended the distinction between domestic and overseas 12 years ago, arguing Jews who care about Jewish life care about it in Los Angeles, in Israel, and throughout the world. This distinction of people, you're a domestic person, you're an overseas person, you're about domestic, is anachronistic from a different world. So we're at a new moment, and therefore the challenge is forging a new synthesis, a new paradigm, and we're probably, in Thomas Kuhn language, pre-paradigm. So that makes the role of the professional and volunteer leader even more critical and more challenging.
Anything?
What he said.
Okay. You talked in your opening remarks about the kind of the passion that motivates your personal professions and careers. I want to quote from an article that Yehuda Kurtzer wrote, actually I think just this last week. Here's what he said: "The conversation that is sorely lacking in the Jewish professional world is what we are offering to our colleagues and employees that keeps them oriented towards the specific demands of this work, to the missions and goals that come with working on behalf of the Jewish people and institutions. And then there was another article by a fellow who works in the Pittsburgh Federation. One of the biggest challenges about working and planning in the Federation system in general is remembering our passion every day. It can get lost in budget, oversight, and campaign. It can be processed nearly to death. If we lose that passion, what else do we have? We're not exactly in this for the money. So you're the heads of two of the largest Jewish institutions in the country. How do you help your staffs maintain this passion?
Well, I think that John and I have a lot of things in common. And I think, first of all, the most important thing is modeling. You know, when I wake up in the morning and I'm passionate about what I do, I come in and I feel passionate, I feel connected. And I think that if I have a bad day, I have to be extra conscious of not letting my staff see that I'm having a bad day, because it's very easy to go in that direction. I also think that, at least what I'm trying to create in Los Angeles, is a sense of collaboration within the staff, bringing in really dynamic people, taking people that were already at the Federation and empowering them, making everybody feel invested in the work, and that every opinion matters, that it isn't just something coming from the top, that it's not pre-decided, that we can sit around and have the kinds of conversations. And to what John was saying earlier, I think to have the kinds of conversations maybe we didn't have in the past. Meaning, you know, what do we really all believe, what are we in this work for? You know, what are we all getting? Because the truth of the matter is, we don't do it for the paycheck, right? We do it because we care. And I think I had said when we were earlier, I was at National Young Leadership Cabinet in Miami, and this woman was making a presentation, and she had this flow chart, and she said, these are the reasons why people are involved in this work. You know, the why, the what, the how much. And she said, she's seeing professionals give up the why and only care about everything else. And I stood up and defended the people I know because we're doing it for the why. So we have to reinforce, we have to be together in a way that's mutually meaningful. I think we have to help each other, support each other. And when things get rough, I think that we have to have an environment where people can feel comfortable to share their frustrations, because the work is sometimes challenging, and we never have enough to do everything that we want to do. I mean, my biggest frustration is when staff people come to me and they have a really great idea, or there's a really big need, and I recognize the fact that we have limited resources. And it can be discouraging when you really know that you could solve a problem by doing X, but there's only this much resources to support it. So we have to come up with creative ways. Well, maybe we can't solve the problem, but maybe we can move to another place with the problem. And I think it's a constant collaboration, conversation, and to feel like we're all in this together.
Actually, we should find some areas where we disagree. I agree with you fully. I would say translating that is hard. My own vision stuff talks about creating an inspired community and caring community, and I've said, but you can't only talk about it out there, you have to bring it in. So what we've worked hard, it's a long process of what it means to create an inspired and caring place, because what it means to recruit and retain the highest quality professionals. You are correct that in this particular world we're at, where there are so many foundations and donors that are prepared to support all sorts of startups. You know, one of the problems we have in New York, and that we have a lot of fabulous staff, but you work hard in the Federation. And you can, I hope I am not making a statement of anybody in the room, you can work less hard in other places in Jewish life. So that's why we do a new employee orientation. And I always spend an hour, it goes on all day, and I always say, I know you came here for a job, but I hope this becomes for each of you a cause. Because the reason this works, I mean, certainly in a federation, and I would hope that's true everywhere, that to believe that we actually represent something critically important for both the Jewish community and beyond. Lemashal, one example, we live in a period of unbridled individualism, including in philanthropy. Everybody wants to do their own thing. I'm going to support my synagogue. We should. My day school. We must. My alma mater. Federations actually represent something totally against the grain, which says, I want you to take care of the whole community and the whole Jewish people. I always say, those you like and those you don't like, those you agree with and those you don't agree with. That is a counterculture. I love this. You know, people say you're in the establishment. I actually think it's a counterculture, which may be delusional, but we are against the grain of a contemporary culture where individualism is without limits. I love that about this work. And I think the key is how you recruit people that share that, and therefore this goes from being a job to a cause. And that's true at both the volunteer level, the professional level, and the volunteer level. And I think there's a hunger, and that's why one of the reasons why we've stayed with that. Other federations have gone in other directions. I'm not judging. They've accepted designated gifts as annual gifts. We've ultimately drawn a line and say that doesn't mean on other things, but for an annual campaign, we believe it is actually a sacred curriculum for Jewish collective responsibility. So the question is how you work on that, how you model caring inside. It's not always easy. You said you let go, you brought in new people. You know, that's not so easy in places like federations or elsewhere to be doing the personnel changes that are required. But if you're going to have a strong professional, at times you need to make tough decisions and live with them. And it's, you know, I sometimes say, I've never met anyone fired well. You know, somehow it was how it was done. Maybe that's a little harsh. But we work hard at this question of, we worked with the Great Place to Work people in New York, how to create a great place to work. But I always say, as much as we're going to put into this, and we have, it's not the beach. I'd rather be at the beach than working. But we've worked very hard in multiple ways, which I could outline, of trying to work on the personnel front, on compensation, on benchmarking compensation, et cetera, on professional development, on providing opportunities for professional growth. Never enough, but the challenge of recruiting and retaining strong professionals is true for us and every institution.
I guess I would just add, it's been a little more complicated for me. Because when you come into a place and you make significant changes, it disrupts the culture. And in the long term, it may have benefits, but in the short term, it's been an adjustment period for a lot of the people that work at the Los Angeles Federation and for me. It might seem like I lose sight of it, but I never lose sight of it. I feel like we're now on the other side of it. But people that do this work, they usually do it for the right reasons. So even when you're making changes, they're difficult changes. I think this is something we have to be conscious of as the presidents of federations every moment, not every day, every moment, because everything we do has impact, and it doesn't have impact on one person. It often has impacts on a lot of people, and that's probably one of the most challenging pieces of it, is to recognize that it's very easy to think about the big idea. You know, we're going to save Soviet Jews, but how you get there and the impact you have on people getting there, sometimes it's easy to get lost. So you always have to be centered and understand the impact you're having on the people that work with you and for you.
So when you're hiring into your organizations, what are you looking for other than competence? I assume that you're looking for technical competence in the people that you're hiring, but beyond that, what is it that you're looking for?
Well, I think the broad area of personnel management is one which none of us have had adequate training for in these jobs. And the area of maybe some do, but certainly this has been learning on the job. And among the most difficult parts of that are hiring. So obviously, I have a tendency to look for people who can demonstrate that they've had impact anywhere, actually. It can be in the Cub Scouts. Show me where you've taken an idea and said something needs to be different, the delta between what is and what needs to be, and show that you've got it done. But obviously, when you're working in a community organization like a federation, but I would say in a shul, in a synagogue, a critical component, yes, are smarts and interpersonal emotional intelligence, the ability to listen and respond, the ability to speak on a broad range of issues and be interesting, so you're an engaging human being. And those are very difficult, not always easy to assess. And of course, I mean, you're trying to assess, does the person have the skills needed for the job, and can that person function in the culture of the organization? Very difficult. So I would say to you, you know, I mean, that's what I'm looking for. A range of skills, deep commitment to Jewish life and the Jewish future, demonstrated ability to affect the world, emotional intelligence, ability to interact. That's a lot of stuff. And none of us have it all. None of us have it all. We're all imperfect human beings. So you're putting them, you know, you're making choices. But that's what I'm trying to look for.
I actually, there's some intangibles. Fire in your eyes. I mean, I have made a lot of staff changes and brought new people in, and I think in the first 15 minutes of a conversation with somebody, you can tell if they have that fire. They really want to come in, because this is hard work. So you have to be driven towards something. Like, you have to care about the community. And if we're really talking about building a community, people who really want to do it. You know, it isn't a job to them, it really is a passion. And I think that is a very intangible thing, that when someone has it, everything else falls into place. And obviously the other difference in the way that I look at things with me is, you know, one of the complaints or criticisms about me when I got this job was, you know, I ran a small operation, I didn't have a boss, I didn't have a lot of employees depending on the project. So I actually like to play to my strengths, and I like to bring in people who have multiple skills, you know, who can raise money, because at the end of the day, I believe, no matter what job you do in the Jewish community, I don't care if you're a social worker, if you're a program person, we all have to raise money. So someone who actually has a passion for raising money, cares about raising money, who can communicate, as John said, who might be in one job but has varied interests. Because the work, we're never going to be able to have people to do all the things we need to get done. So I love the fact of walking into someone's office who's in a completely different area and talking about Jewish education. You know, because I know maybe they went to HUC, and even though they happen to be dealing with social services, you know, they valued their own Jewish education. So I also like to have people that work with me that have varied interests, varied experiences, and if, God forbid, you needed to plug a hole, they could plug that hole, because they might not have the experience, but they have the interest.
John, do you agree that all of the professionals are fundraisers?
Well, I think everybody is a resource developer. And
I'm going to use that from now on.
And there are multiple resources, which include human resources, financial resources, HeartShare.
HeartShare?
HeartShare. I think one of the things that's hard, you like that word, heart? A little new agey for a New Yorker, eh? In other words, I think HeartShare is one of the challenges that faces us that work in a federation, which is we may do great things out there, incredible things, but it's hard to love the federation, right? You love the program for Jewish homeless, you love the Jewish summer camp, you love whatever, but actually the place that may be critical in making it possible. Anyway, so I use the word resource development because I think everyone, whether you're in the program side, I mean, I don't think everyone in the back office of a financial accounting operation, which is critical in maintaining a sense of fiscal integrity, which is a critical asset for a federation. I mean, the sense of appropriate fiscal oversight is a critical piece that doesn't appear on our balance sheet, but is one of the reasons why we've been, you know, in every area, whether it was Madoff and avoiding that, avoiding conflicts of interest long before it happened, we've been adamant on the issue of fiscal accountability and responsibility. So I think that's critical work. But in my view, everyone on the program side and what is considered the program side, and obviously the financial resource development side are all part of raising, and the human resources, both volunteer and professional. Recruiting, you know, we give a course at the Federation called A Complaint is a Gift. Now, we don't record it as an annual gift, but we take every complaint very seriously. It's an opportunity for engagement, and when we particularly anger people, which we do.
Just turned it off. Yeah.
I think I can get this thing on.
Okay, good.
Is it on?
Yep.
Anyway, so a complaint is a gift is actually part of being able to listen, say, I want to sit down with you and seek if we can engage and talk with that, listen to that person, and talk with that person. So I think resource development has many manifestations.
You had said earlier, actually, in the seminar that you thought that every professional was an educator. Is that the same as a resource developer?
I think every Jewish communal professional, rabbi, teacher, federation worker, et cetera, is a communal educator. I think what we're doing when we go and meet with a donor, when we speak at a session like this, when you're teaching, obviously, in a classroom, when you're leading a professional set, we're all involved in educating our community about where we are as a Jewish community and what is needed for the future. And that is a form, in my view, of communal education. It's not teaching people Aleph Bet, it's not teaching people about Shabbat, but it is rather laying out the narrative communally of where we are and what is needed.
I wanted to pick up on something that you said, John, about professional development. One of your colleagues, Barry Rosenberg, the CEO of the St. Louis Federation, commented that they just did a strategic plan, and of the 6 priorities, one of them was recruit, train, and develop exceptional human resources. Quote, "We see this goal as equal to and essential to our service-oriented goals, such as Jewish identity and social service safety net." So what about professional development? Where does this fit into your priority list? And is this, in fact, a responsibility of the Federation? I mean, as you said, the motivation for this work is a passion for the cause. But there has to be a kind of nurturance of this. And this is one of the functions of professional development. So where does this fit?
Well, I mean, I know I'm in an HUC setting, so I should be sensitive to this, but I would say in candor, in New York, granted not the community that LA is, but in New York,
Thank you.
we have a range of institutions, JTS, Yeshiva University, HUC, Columbia, NYU, that I would say are number one, take on the primary responsibility for pre-service training and preparation in the Jewish community. Second of all, one of the things we've learned, which I'm talking about now, pre-service, before people start. One of the things that we've learned is that the career track into the Jewish community is so varied now. So people come from business, people come from law, people come from social work, and people come through programs of Jewish communal preparation like the one at HUC. So that's another complexity. We've taken on a role, probably inadequate, to enrich Jewish communal professionals in service. So whether it be, to give you an example, we created a program called the Mulestein Program. We did a survey and found that Jewish communal professionals, many of the stars at years 5, 6, 7, and 8 drop out. Why do they drop out? They don't see opportunities for advancement, et cetera, et cetera. So we raised additional monies and put together an extraordinary 2-year process, which included missions to Israel, missions to the former Soviet Union, but most important, ongoing mentorship and seminars, which were meant to enrich and retain the highest performers, folks, in our community, both at the Federation and beyond, and this was open to our agencies and synagogues as well. Ditto, we have the Wiener Center, which is a center for in-service training for Jewish communal professionals, now offered to both everyone in the Federation network as well as to synagogues, not yet to day schools. We set up a day school institute for day school principals at Columbia University Business School, which brought together Reform to Haredi principals of day schools to spend 18 days together in an institute of this kind. Extraordinary in and of itself. So there's is it enough? No. We're also working on, as I said to you, on multiple fronts on becoming a great place to work. But I think, but the last comment, so we've put real energy. I don't know if I would put it at the same level as dealing with the Jewish homeless on West 23rd Street, feeding 100,000 elderly in the former Soviet Union. I just don't know. I mean, Barry in St. Louis may be a different place, doesn't have the other professional institutions of training that both LA and New York does. In a time of scarce resources, I'm not sure I'd prioritize it at that level, but we're putting real focus on it as well.
But what resources are you putting? The Wiener Center, for instance. What resources are you putting into professional? Are you actually
dollars?
supporting?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, we're probably spending between the internships, Wiener Center, Muhlstein program, which is not there, the Day School Institute, and all sorts of programs, training. We're probably spending somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. I don't know that, but somewhere. It's real money at this time. We've also just in Russia, we've set up a program to train Jewish communal professionals in Russia, an emerging field. We're doing that with the JDC. And now we're doing a whole training program in Israel. One of the areas we're working on in Israel is the issue of Jewish identity for Israelis. Subject for another day. Rather remarkable that the Federation, because we believe the problem that faces Jews in New York, Tel Aviv, and Moscow is similar. And hence we're working on Jewish professional development, helping those in the secular schools become able to deal with Jewish religious curriculum that are now being brought into the schools in multiple ways. We last year funded a whole program where 100,000 Israelis attended high holiday services in Jewish community centers in Israel, which we funded. We had to train a whole coterie of people to do that. So professional development is actually in some ways linked to program. But so it's similar, but in each setting, Moscow, Israel, New York, different setting requires different response.
Jay, where is this on your priority list?
It just went up really fast. No, I think that it's definitely in our consciousness, and it's definitely something that I think we're going to have to spend some time with the New York Federation to learn from them. I think one of the great things that happened in the system is that we do learn from each other, and so it was a joke, but I'm serious. It makes me think that we need to prioritize it. Look, in the scheme of the restructuring of the Federation, I can't tell you I've spent a tremendous amount of time on it. I have spent some time, as we discussed recently at lunch, but I do think that there's some learning we can do, certainly from New York, and I think that's something that I would not prioritize it like Barry and St. Louis either, but I do think we need to put some resources and energy behind it.
Okay. So last question before I open this up. As you saw, there's a number of students here from the School of Jewish Nonprofit Management. What do you think is important that they know, that they learn? What should a professional acquire going into this field?
Well, I'll just talk about two things, then.
Yeah.
You want to start?
I'll start.
Good.
I think John said it best. We're at an extraordinary moment in Jewish history. The work that you're about to embark upon is God's work, important work, sacred work. And we have an opportunity as professionals to reimagine what this work can be for ourselves and for our community. We have an opportunity to dream. I think it's very easy to jump into a job and just do A, B, C, D, and E and lose sight of why you started. And I would recommend, and I think I said this to a class last year, that you have as open a mind as possible about what the possibilities for the work is and how much you can impact it. And in the work that we do, we impact individuals' lives, communities' lives, and we make an impact on Jewish history. And that's a weighty responsibility on the one hand. On the other hand, you have an opportunity to make something meaningful out of your life. But don't expect the place that you go to work to give you that opportunity. You have to grab it. You have to walk into the New York Federation or the LA Federation or the Museum of the Holocaust or any other organization and say, I'm here and I'm going to accomplish something. And then go and do it.
I'll just speak about two areas. One, earlier today, with some of the students that are here, we did the beginning of an exercise. I gather they're doing it in an ongoing way elsewhere, which is to think real hard about what it is that brought them into this work and how they view where Jewish life is and what they believe it could be, what I call the delta between what is and what could be. And I urge Jewish professionals to always act as if, wherever they are, they should only go to places where they believe they can impact that agenda, if possible, which brought them into this work. And they should act as if, whether it's at the congregation, I always say the best job I ever had was actually the principal of a Hebrew school. For two reasons, one of which is 40 years later, there are still kids, or 35 years, that come to me and say, you changed my life. Whatever I may be doing, I may be helping a lot of other people, all these people, but that direct experience of being able to bring people to experience Shabbat, to experience the inspiration of Jewish life, is missing in my present job. So that question of getting clear on what it is you really believe is most critical for the Jewish future, holding on to that, thinking about jobs, not in terms of the job or the compensation, and I'm a big boy, none of us are, but rather, in that place, every job I took, everybody said they thought it was a mistake. That's a longer discussion. Every job. But why did I go there? Because what brought me into this, what changed my life was Camp Ramah. It's there I experienced, I was not raised in a community, in a family like that. I experienced Shabbat for the first time. It touched my heart and soul in the deepest of way. And I said, I want to spend my life to broaden and enable broader members of the Jewish community to experience the power of being involved in Jewish community and Jewish life. That means, but many of our institutions have become banal, encrusted. Kedusha was not accessible. So I go to places where I think I can impact that. I stay there as long as I can. And when I think, for whatever reason, the time has passed, I lift my eyes and kind of say, where else is a place where one can impact that? But that requires each of us to get clear-ish about what it is that has brought us into this work. The second issue, I would say, which is also a longer discussion, I think we face a huge challenge on the issue of Israel education. I always say, you can say anything you want about Torah, mitzvah, God, but Israel is the third rail of Jewish life. Let me simply say it in this way. We have conflated Israel education and Israel advocacy for 60 years. We've basically asked American Jews to come out and cheer. We've not provided them a context to develop their own views and their own visions of what Israel can be, should be, might be, even radically conflicting views. And therefore, although we ask people to accept collective responsibility for the Jewish people, it kind of stops for understandable reasons. The state of Israel was attacked in 48, 56, 67, 73. I make no judgment on what happened. That may have been the historical imperative that has left generations intellectually naked to deal with the complexity of contemporary Israel. We have a huge catch-up to do on that. 60 years of catch-up, it's not going to happen in a minute, but what's needed first is an intellectual, ideological head change in the Jewish community, like a chiropractic shift. They call it noodles or something. Anyway, huge. So far too many of our community, young and old, we talk about it's a problem on the college campus. Trust me, it's a college for all of us in the Jewish community. So when you say, what is this? We need at HUC and JTS and YU, I'm trying to encourage courses like Wrestling with Israel, which will let people realize it's not about learning the history. You've got to learn the history. It's about developing your own views about what Israel can be, should be, and might be, because once you're across that, you're engaged, you're involved, for some, and you can help others come into that. So I know that tends to be a conversation stopper in such gatherings, but I would say to you, if you ask the question, what do I think people need to learn in this point? Last comment, I think they also, and that's rabbis, Jewish educators, Jewish communal workers, we need to think together about what it means to build inspired and caring Jewish community. One of the reasons I went to the seminary as vice chancellor, because the then Gershon Cohen understood that the changing of the rabbinate, Zichrono Livracha, the training of the rabbinate had to move from text, basically, to the question of what does it mean to build community. I don't know of too many educational settings, I make no judgment about HUC, where the issue of what it means to build inspired and caring community is part of the curriculum. Even we think about it together consciously. So I think, bring it back to the paradigm I spoke about earlier. If we're in a moment of paradigm change, then the educational institutions need to think quite differently about what it means to prepare future people to be rabbis, Jewish educators, Jewish communal workers. And that is a collaborative process that I think needs all of us to get around and begin work at.
Great. Let's open up for some questions. Lisa.
Hi, this is a question for John, but I think it relates to LA. It's a little bit off topic because it's about Jewish education. I know that the New York Federation has done amazing things in the field of Jewish education. I don't even know all of the things that you've done. I think it would be great.
I don't either.
What? Well, if you could talk a little bit about the kind of architecture of all the things you've done and how you arrived at what you did, and if you have any advice to give the LA Jewish Federation, which is embarking on its own thinking of architects, of, rethinking Jewish education.
Can you repeat questions?
I'm sorry.
The question was initially to John as to the architecture that they've built around a new support for Jewish education, and whether this is a model that LA could benefit from as well. Is that right?
I would never give advice to LA on this matter. And I'm being serious because I don't know enough about the LA Jewish community. Let me share a little bit of the architecture or intellectual context for what we've done in New York. Actually, one might say, in unfair terms, it's less about education and more about community. Our assumption was that if you are not raised in a community, the response to the 1990 study, 52%. So many of us have been involved in Jewish education for decades, and we've been trying to focus the community put more focus on it. The 1990 study, 52%, was a wake up to the community, freaked the community out, etc. And what was the response? And many said the key is to strengthen Jewish education. Some of us argued, yes, we need to strengthen Jewish education. But if you are not raised in a committed family, if you're not raised in a committed community, why learn any of this? And to be quite candid, I took it from my own experience, which I'll just spend another minute on. He goes on now for an hour. Not raised in a committed, a wonderful family I was raised with. They just weren't, it was 3 times a year synagogue plays, synagogue attendees, thrown out of Hebrew school, end up at Camp Ramah, and it was there that I experienced Shabbat for the first time. And then I went to the Chadar Ochel, the dining room, and they were doing this Birkat HaMazon, which led to, what's that? An educational question. And then I go, oh, that's the grace after meals. And then, of course, this was so touching me and moving me that I wanted to actually participate in this community. I wanted to learn what was needed. I wanted to learn the skills needed to participate in a community which I experienced to be inspired. And that was reinforced later by youth groups, trips to Israel, etc., which I experienced powerful, living Jewish communities. So I actually believe that the challenge is about Jewish education, but less. It is actually, how do we help so many of our institutions become inspired places where those who are not raised in committed families will be asked to say, I want to become participants. 70% of American Jews are members of synagogues at one point in their life. That is an unbelievable figure. For many, it's a walk-in, walk-out. Why? There are synagogues that are breathtaking in their capacity to provide meaning, purpose, and I hope begin the educational process. I want to be part of it. So, the architecture was, how do we help the gateway institutions, which we defined as synagogue, community center, camp, and Hillel, become inspired places, Aleph, and B, how do we increase participation in what have appear to be the most powerful experiences of Jewish life, Jewish summer camps, Israel trips, if we had the resources, day schools, although that's for a more highly identified community, and youth groups. Now, that's not the only thing. We've also, I would say, spawned a whole culture of innovation which is a whole other discussion in New York. From HEB, which I'm not particularly proud of, to JDub, to everything else. We've been funding
6
all
points.
sorts,
6 points.
6 points, all sorts of startups. As an old Chavurah Jew, to try to encourage people to take Jewish life and create Jewish life that works with them. That's also led to professional development programs for day school principals, congregational educators, which I think you know something about. We were involved with HUC in a range of programs to strengthen congregational education in powerful ways itself. So I would say it's a multi-focused attempt to strengthen the key gateway institutions where marginal Jews encounter Jewish life, in the hope that those encounters will be the kind of inspired places that can set them on the educational journey. The notion that that Jews who have not been raised in committed places should learn the stuff that you and I value, I don't know where that comes from. So I think, and the reason I'm emphasizing this is, there are people that talk about outreach. There are people that talk, I think that we don't acknowledge that we have a product problem, that many of our institutions have actually become stultifying. There are inspiring institutions, but many for a whole lot of reasons. So that provides an opportunity, and the question for a federation is, how do we become a valued resource for helping institutions become inspired, for helping more people attend the most powerful Jewish educational experiences, mostly informal education from my perspective? How do we strengthen the Jewish professional, the quality of Jewish professionals so they can provide leadership? There's no one answer to this. As opposed to, as we all know, as opposed to rescuing 1 million Jews from the Soviet Union, or even rescuing 7,000 from the Felas Mora, there's no one answer. This requires multiple approaches and long-term.
If you spent the entire evening with John and I, you would learn that we disagree on very few things. And I think you'd be surprised to know that the LA Federation is moving in a very, very swiftly, very thoughtfully in the direction that John articulated, in terms of engagement, in terms of looking at new institutions, looking at existing institutions, and how, as John said, how we can assist them to make and create more meaningful experiences. At the end of the day, we know the things that have worked for us, and some of those things work for young people today: trips to Israel summer camp, quality Jewish educational experiences. We are moving in that direction. I think it's the #1 priority of the Federation. We call it ensuring the Jewish future for our children and grandchildren. But we have the benefit of learning from not just John, but from the New York Federation, from other federations in this country, other institutions. And we're really on our way to, I think, opening up a whole new way of thinking about education and engagement in Los Angeles.
I mean, I would add, by the way, and I know one of the reasons I've become a pretty a raving fan of Natan Sharansky in his present position. Sharansky, as head of the Jewish Agency, is arguing identity is now the driver of everything we care about. If you're not identified positively a Jew, why care about feeding the elderly in Los Angeles or in Kiev? Why care about making certain that everyone can go to a Jewish summer camp? Why care about securing Israel's future? So that is a huge paradigm change, and I think he can help the community make the paradigm change that's needed. Even post-1990, fundamentally federations, including ours, have found donors more responsive to the issue of poverty and crisis than the education issue for a lot of reasons. And our hope is that a guy like Sharansky and others can help. The community needs a change on this to understand that identity, if you are not identified positively, why care about Israel? And then if you really take literally, we are in a brand new setting, total open society. We are increasingly Jews by choice. So we face a set of issues here, which is attenuated Jewish identity, radically change of place of Israel in the Jewish world, and a flat world. So that needs us to focus, to be able to focus resources in the areas that Jay was talking about and that we have as well in response to your question.
Jonathan?
Don't make your advice flowery. I mean, we learn from direct, honest conversation, and this is a room that needs to learn from you. So what advice would you give to each other?
Did you hear that? Oh, the question is, what advice would John and Jay give to each other in a direct, honest way?
Oh, we are really. All right.
Bring it on.
I'll go first. So we have known each other a very long time, right?
Oh, what? I didn't hear you.
We've known each other a long time.
Okay.
Look, recognizing that New York is New York, and you have certain challenges, and you're by far the biggest federation, the biggest Jewish community in the world. I still believe at the end of the day, this work needs to be done by taking risks. That something that we've done in the past may have worked, but in order for us to make the impact that you're talking about, we need to be less risk averse and take some chances. So my advice would be, even though you're I think $180 million campaign, some ridiculous. By the way, you could lend us some money in Los Angeles. That would be your second advice.
As with always, we have an ask.
That was the resource development part of the evening. Is that in this chapter of your professional life, and I don't know if you have another act after the Federation, or if this is going to be where you ride off into the sunset, that you, no, I don't know, no, don't take that, you know what I'm saying, you know that, I'm not talking about that your birthday's this week, that wasn't what I was referring to. Talking about the fact is that this may be what you do, this is your last professional act. Some people think it should be my last professional act. That's
In fact, tonight.
My advice would be that you could make a major impact on Jewish life in America, because if New York does it, others will follow, and to take more risks.
I don't know what advice. I mean, I want to respond to that, but I would say in response to this, Jay and I have known each other a long time. We actually don't know each other well at a deep tissue level, nor do I actually know what he's doing here, but we interact in precisely what he's doing here, although often said that he's learning a lot from what we're doing in New York, which is, I take as a compliment. We do interact in national settings and global settings, and I want to say I welcome Jay's smarts and his energy and his willingness to probe and puncture accepted wisdom. So I welcome that a lot.
Thank
So
you.
I would say keep at it.
Thank you.
I would say actually the strategy for I think at the global level, I know not about here, okay? Getting clear on which of the issues are the most urgent. In other words, there's a lot of stuff you can take on. But one of the key issues I know I find in my my work, is you can't take on every issue. For me, I'm taking on, to give you an example, why am I taking on this issue of the problem of the conflation of Israel education and Israel advocacy? I think it is a present and urgent danger to a North American Jewish community and world Jewry. So there are numerous other issues I could deal with. The whole relationship of network agencies at this point with Federation. I mean, there are tons of things. JFNA, we could have a whole night on that. I mean, we sometimes, how much time do I want to spend on the National Alliance, which is an organization of the national agencies funded by the federations, the Jewish Foundation for Jewish Culture, JTA, National Hillel. So a person in my job, and yours, so the question is strategically, which is the most urgent, and where do you think you can have impact? And my sense is you're in a period, I can't believe I'm responding to my dear friend Jonathan this way. My sense is you're in a moment of fast learning, real change here, and I love the skepticism and the questioning you bring in national settings. I welcome it. I think the question of getting clear on which issue to take on, and that you can't take on I do not have the time, I don't have the resource, I don't have the capital. For us to take on at this point Israel education, Israel advocacy, it is the third rail of Jewish life. There are many that find it just fine the way things are. And one has to determine what's most urgent. So my question is, that filter, developing that further, certainly at the national level, I think would be helpful.
Marcy, you have private place?
There are some lay people that are passionate about the Jewish communal experience, and others that could care less. They just want to write a check and let you take care of it. But you're talking about issues that are really transformation, as Jay said. So how do you educate the general lay community, and how do you see the partnership in the work with the lay community? Because if they don't share your vision, they're going to stop writing the checks. And they're going to write for things that are easier for them to understand. So where's that? How do you see the connection of the partnership?
I'll just be quick. Look, in New York Federation, we have 1,800 volunteers on committees and task forces and commissions. Our executive committee, our executive committee meets every other, executive committee of 15 people meets every other week. It is a very serious place of lay professional governance. However, we are a community of 1.5 million people. I always say one of the challenges we have is, to make it up, Tulsa, Oklahoma has an executive committee of 15, and New York UJ Federation has an executive committee of 15. That's a problem, because many people would like to be in that room or the rooms that lead to it. So there are two different parts of this. One is the communication. And as a CEO, and no doubt this is true for Jay, you just never stop communicating. One-to-one, groups, you say, I mean, you bore yourself. But the need to explain who and what we're doing and why we're significant never ends. The question of lay professional governance, you know something? I actually think people get it. I think people know that the lay professional relationship is valued in New York UJ Federation. They know it. They know it because that's the word that comes forth from an executive committee where views are taken so seriously. Having said that, I believe the professional's role with volunteer leadership is to get clear. You know, we have identified, in response to Professor Aaron's question, I identified some quick strategies we've taken. That's a critical thing for an organization because it provides a basis for inclusion and exclusion. So when a volunteer leader comes who's not particularly involved, why aren't you doing adult Jewish learning? You know, I mentioned Synagogue Center, Camp Hillel, day school, summer camp, youth group, professional development. They come and say, why aren't you doing family education? You're able to say, that's a great idea. It's very important. But we've focused on these 7. Why? It's critical for a federation to have demonstrated impact, to say that you actually did these things. And if you simply respond to everybody coming through the door, you actually will not. I mean, one of the things, I will share this tomorrow with a few of you, one of the things I've learned in this, one of the first things we did when I became CEO, it took 2 years, is we created a Jewish hospice system in New York. We had not had one. Okay, we brought the leading experts in the world together for 2.5 years, for a year and a half. What does it mean to create a Jewish hospice system for 1.5 million Jews? The Catholics, Baruch Hashem, thank the Lord for them, had been taking care of our family and friends. It was time for the largest Jewish community in the world to have a Jewish hospice system. We used our family service agencies for the home care, hospice means home care, and we didn't even know it at the time, the first freestanding Jewish residential hospice in North America. Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut, open to everybody in relationship with government. The amount of money this required was probably $2 million. In the context of $150 million, you know, not irrelevant. The fact that we were able to do that shows that a federation, and I could go on that. So it's critical to have impact, and the lay professional relationship has to help you, together with them, say, these are the 7 things we're going to focus on. That provides a basis of inclusion, exclusion, whether it's in Jewish education, you can revisit them. You can't do everything in the field of Jewish education. You will have no demonstrated impact. It's a vast field. Critical for a federation to be able to have demonstrated impact, whether it's in congregations, Israel trips, and similarly on the Chesed side.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Anybody on this side? Jenna.
The majority of Jewish communal service workers are women. but the topmost positions in the profession are mostly held by men. And I'm interested in hearing if you think that there's a glass ceiling in the profession and what you think could be done to change it.
Great question. You know, the truth is, this is a lay professional discussion. This is a volunteer professional because the truth is the volunteers are the search committees. I mean, I'm delighted that half of my senior management team are fabulous women, and I think they could become my successor. But at the end of the day, you're going to be a search committee here of volunteers that are going to make that judgment. Having said that, you know, I don't want to be run out of town, and at the moment it's been okay up till now. I do think there is a quality. My dear friend Schiffer Bronsnick will who knows what. I think there's a quality of the annual campaign dominance in the largest federations, which is rough and tough at times, that now I know the campaign director is here, a wonderful woman, a new campaign director, so I wish you every success. And, but there is a quality of, you know, I always say the last 2 weeks of an annual campaign, you know, all year long we're about relationship and engagement, et cetera, and the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks we become the federation that no one wants, right? Close the annual gift. And there's a quality of elbows and shoulders, and I think there is a sense among some of the lay leadership that the experience has been that, I don't know, I mean, you can fill out the sentence. I think that's changing. I think it's great that we have a female executive in San Francisco. And by the way, in so many other national Jewish organizations, we have excellent female educators. I think it'll be, my hope would be, not educators, female executives. My hope would be places like HUC and JTS will follow that kind of lead as well. In other words, I think it's, but in the large cities, I think the annual campaign is a quality. But I don't know the answer to this.
I actually think it's a different problem. And I think I'm privileged, many of whom are in the room, to work with incredible women at the Federation. I think the problem is not a problem of male-female. I think it's a problem of upward mobility in the system, honestly. And I'm new, and I poke holes. And first of all, I don't see opportunities within federations for anybody to move up. And it happens that if the men are the ones at the top, and they're not necessarily going anywhere. And also what I see, and I was quoted in the JTA recently about this, is within the top leadership of federations, it seems that there's more recycling than bringing in new people. So if it's not a lot of upward mobility and not a lot of movement at the top, then there are not a lot of opportunities for anybody, never mind a woman, to be in these jobs. And I think we have to figure this out, because when I see, you know, federation exec jobs being filled by somebody who is in another community, and it's just basically either lateral moves or a little step up, and I look at, you know, even in Los Angeles, people that have been in the same job for a long time, and I don't think they had the opportunity to move up, I think we have some systemic problems we have to address. And if we address them and women want this job, then I think that would make it a lot easier.
Okay, one last question. Okay. Did people hear that? The question is how to address the issue of young, serious philanthropists who want to be directing where their funds are going and not participating in necessarily the, or letting the decisions about where the funds get allocated to other bodies within the Federation.
Look, it is the question that is asked most often, and I offer a response which, may be a reason why I should go off to the sunset sooner than later. And what I mean by that, I think we as a Jewish people, we say, Avadim hayinu, we were slaves. Al chet shechatanu, we sinned. We actually are, I know it's not popular today, collectivists. We daven in a minyan. And I believe that's what a federation is about. There are going to be numerous opportunities for individuals to give gifts all over to individual institutions. And the truth be said, if they gave us, someone gives us $10 million to do a youth initiative, we're not going to say no. But we are going to continue to value the annual gift because we think it actually represents who and what we're about. And by the way, the heretical thing which I have voiced elsewhere, and if in fact over the next 5 years we in New York or elsewhere raise less dollars, I think the metrics is wrong. The only way we evaluate ourselves is if we are more money. The truth is, how we use our money is equally important. And if the changed circumstance of Israel actually means that some will not, people stretched to give till you bleed, because Israel was literally on the cusp, or on the edge. So I know this is even to say it here is, I hope, taking risks. Maybe, well, if we raised less money, it wouldn't be the disaster of the world. The most important thing is what we represent and the impact we can have on the critical issues of the Jewish future. Now, I know that's a lot to digest. But if one takes seriously the notion that we are at a significant period of paradigm change, therefore what a federation is and what it's going to become, the whole relationship to, and I know it's quite different here, but for us, network agencies. We in New York still provide 70% of our money in unrestricted grants to 27 Jewish community centers, 17 camps, Hillel's on 18 campuses, I could go on, and human service agencies, which are the envy of the human service field, but are now fundamentally, even though our money is quite significant, funded with government dollars. So this relationship to a network structure, JDC and JAP, was in a prior era. So we're talking about a period that we need to recalibrate. If the only metrics is more, first of all, I think we'll be self-defeating. Attenuated Jewish identity, changing place of Israel, etc., and the trend towards individualism, including in philanthropy. So I want to say, I believe we represent a critical, who we are. I've come to the view, which may be off, that people give to us primarily not because of what we do, but what we represent. They actually don't know, too many people actually don't know what we do. But they're giving us money because they somehow have a sense that we are going to take care of the Jewish community in New York and Israel and throughout the world, and I believe we do. Only X number of people have the acquired taste or interest to get in deep. What are we really doing in Russia, etc.? It's not for everybody. Now, it is true that has led some people to take their largest gifts elsewhere, particularly outside the Jewish community. But still, I think the level of giving, certainly in New York, is still extraordinary because of what we represent and what we continue to represent for the Jewish people and the Jewish community, both here and globally. And I would resist. What are we doing for the next generation? Tons of things. We have extraordinary next generation engagement, incredible events that leads to volunteerism, study, admissions, and hopefully over time. The other thing is, one last thing, federations may be acquired tastes. It may not be for everybody 25 and 30. There are some recent articles that have been coming out. We're over-focusing, on those in their 20s and 30s right now in terms of federation engagement. Let's engage them in identified Jews. And let us assume that if they are identified Jews, once they've raised their kids, they've been deeply involved, hopefully, in their synagogue. They've been involved in early childhood. Over time, they will come to say, I want to have a broader role in the Jewish community. That may be for the late 30s and 40s and 50s, a different let me be frank. Federations were not for me when I was in the 20s and 30s. Federations were about how to create Jewish life that worked first for us, then to create institutions that worked for my young family. It was only then I realized that I wanted to have a broader impact. So that made, I think we ought to be careful about, I thought we maximize those in their teens, 20s, and 30s that it can experience inspired Jewish life. If they do, and become identified as Jews, and if federations are still responding boldly to taking care of Jewish life in our cities, Los Angeles, New York, and globally, they'll be there.
Thank you both for fascinating conversation.